Well, we're here in Yreka, California, and we're visiting with my good friend and fellow veteran Leroy Crabtree. And Leroy and I served together in the 2nd of the 27th Wolfhounds in the 2nd Charlie Company in the 2nd Platoon in 1969. And Leroy, first of all, I cannot thank you enough and how good it is to be with you today, my friend.
Thanks for stopping by.
Yep. And first of all, I'm just going to ask you, where were you born?
Riderwood, Washington.
Okay. And go ahead.
It was an old-fashioned company town. Whoever owned the company, you had to buy through them. You had to go.
Yeah.
You had to go see the company doctor. You had to go to the company store. They ran an account on your name.
Sure.
And then the finance department would check against the family doctor and check against whatever you might have bought at the store.
Okay.
And you subtracted it.
And your date of birth?
Oh, 21 August 1949.
Okay. And did you volunteer for the Army or were you drafted?
I was drafted.
Okay. And what were the circumstances around that? What were you doing at that time when you got your letter?
4 days after I turned 19, I got my draft notice. So I lived in Broderick, which is now West Sacramento, right across from the river from Sacramento, California. But you had to go over to the county seat, Woodland, and we went over there in the middle of the night, and they had, 15, 20 Greyhound buses.
Oh boy.
And
I remember.
The Yolo County Sheriff's Department had deputy sheriffs there, and they'd call your name off and tell you what bus to get on. So
Where did you take basic training?
North Fort Lewis.
Oh, so Fort Lewis. Okay.
Yeah.
And how about AIT?
They moved us right across a rocky parade ground to AIT, which was infantry for me.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of the guys actually went to Fort Lewis.
Yeah.
And they stayed right there. Now, I went to Fort Ord, and I thought I was going to go someplace else. I stayed right there for AIT.
Yeah.
So, what is one memory that sticks out in your mind about basic training?
How they use push-ups for correcting somebody in your training company. Punishment, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
They would just pick at people random until eventually we had certain guys that would make honest mistakes routinely. So besides whatever PT you did, you probably did 500 push-ups a day
Mm-hmm.
for punishment reasons. But
Okay.
then they switched and called it platoon training because they had to get away from the punishment aspect.
Sure.
Yeah.
When did you get to Vietnam?
End of December 1968, probably the last week. We went at Tonsanute Air Force Base and went over to the Army Replacement Battalion.
Mm-hmm.
And we stayed there a full month pulling perimeter guard because January's Tet season. So they took us from the replacement battalion and put us on the bunker line. So you'd be up all night and pull guard at night and then come back, and you'd wait usually maybe a week or two at the most before they shipped you out.
And I was just going to ask you about that. When did you actually join Charlie Company?
Oh geez, January, maybe first week of February. They sent us from Long Bin Replacement Battalion to Cu Chi.
Okay.
And we got reassigned to Charlie Company, 2nd of the 27th Wolfhounds in Cu Chi. I think we had about a 10-day period where we went to classes and got acclimated to the heat or the rain. So.
And a little jungle training, I think. Wasn't there like a 3 or 4 day?
Oh yeah.
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 So that the thing I remember most about that is they used to have those concussion grenades.
Oh, yeah.
And they'd never tell anybody, and then all of a sudden one would go off about 5 feet from you.
Yep,
And
yep.
some NCO would be standing there and he'd look at you and say, "Welcome to Vietnam." And
We were told,
scared the absolute daylights out of you.
welcome to the Wolhounds.
Yep. Who are the first guys, so now you're sent out to the field. Do you remember where they were at when you joined them?
We had to go up to Tay Ninh, and that was probably considered Northern Three Corps. And we were up there maybe 2 months before they sent us back to Cu Chi, and they put us out on the border, and near the Parrot's Beak, actually.
Yeah.
So
And who were the first guys that you remember specifically when you got to the platoon? Who were the first guys that you ran into or met or remember?
oh, it was the old timers. It's kind of like grade school, high school. The old timers were the cool dudes, and the new guys. Hey man, come over here. I got a detail for you. And they'd take you over to the latrine where you had to burn the waste or fill sandbags or stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I thought the old timers were really just outrageously arrogant, but years later, it took me years to realize they were that way mentally because what they endured during their time prior to 12 or 14 of us coming in the platoon. Because you guys had seen some bad stuff before we got there, so.
Do you remember where the platoon was actually operating out of? Were you guys in a fire support base somewhere and then you'd go up to the border? Or does Jackson sound familiar?
Jackson was, I believe, a brigade base camp.
Okay.
So there were just hundreds of people there all the time,
Yeah.
besides whoever rotated in. So
So what did one of these old timers, when he got a hold of you, what job did he give you in the platoon?
at first it was just waste burning
No,
details.
no, I'm sorry. Rifleman, duper.
Oh, yeah,
you know,
a
what-
rifleman.
Okay.
So one of the old timers came by and said, hey, we needed 2 guys for the machine gun team, M60. You carry so much ammo. If you're on the machine gun team, and this is what sold me, you don't have to pull work details. So me and a man, I can't remember his name because I have this mental block, but he had big buck teeth and he was 6 feet tall roughly, and he was white.
Ron Burrow.
That was it. So but me and him took the job so we wouldn't have to do work details. But, you know, they caught up with us with carrying extra ammo, and if we got resupplied with 5-gallon containers of water,
Sure.
me and Ron would have to carry the empty containers.
Mhm.
It was just, the old timers had worked at it long enough that it was somebody else's turn to do
Sure.
the details.
Sure.
But-
What, I want you to think back and tell me, what was it like the very first time you went on a night ambush patrol?
Doc Flores, he was the next guy over. I didn't have a poncho liner. And you know, at night in the jungle, even in the summertime, it gets a little cold.
Oh, yes.
So Doc said, hey, Crabtree, here's half my poncho liner. So, yeah, it must have been middle of the night, and we were the platoon on the far left end. And actually, Ron laid his weapon down next to me. And somewhere in the middle of the night, 2 guys, Vietnamese guys, came down this jungle path, and one of the old timers fired him up. He killed one, and one escaped. So next morning, there's a young Vietnamese man lying in our kill zone. So he had to be checked out and stuff like
Mhm.
that. But,
So I'm guessing that being a new guy, that was pretty shocking.
oh, sure.
I
The
mean-
only violence I'd ever been exposed to in grade school, high school, were fist fights. I had a half a dozen. I
Sure.
lost all of them. But you didn't expect to see somebody dead within 10, 20 feet.
By the way, just so you know, we started out in San Diego. Our first interview was Doc Flores.
Oh, really? How's he?
One of the first thing he did is he said, "Have you seen Crabtree yet?" Now, we went to the next guy in San Clemente,
Yeah.
and that was Lanny Ross. And we weren't into the interview very long, and he goes, "Crabtree," and he starts telling the story about you and him and some of the guys out on a sweep or something. So I just wanted to let you know, there's a lot of guys that want to connect.
Doc Flores, he took care the first time I was wounded. We were a blocking force. I had to read that article on the page on the computer 5 or 6 times, and then I realized, wait a minute, that's where I got wounded the very first time. One of the guys was, most of the guys on that day we were a blocking force. I thought they were all old timers, but there were a couple new guys shot in the legs. The sniper would shoot one guy, and then another guy would come out to help his friend.
Exactly.
And so that guy gets shot. And finally, between the two guys, they would get up and move back to our position behind this thick rice paddy dike. And that's where we had most of the wounded. Were right next to me and Ron and the machine gunner. I can't remember his name either, but
Was it Manarelli? Greg Manarelli?
he was a tall, slender, white guy with short hair.
George Cush?
I don't know. You know, it's been so long. It's
Okay.
something in my brain memory processing. And
And the only reason I mention those names, or they were there that day with you. So I mean, I'm just trying to fill in some of the blanks.
we were on the far left side, me and Ron and the machine gunner, and they had the other platoon machine gunner on the right flank. And I was carrying a lot of ammo that day, but I got harassed by some of the guys calling me lifer and kiss ass and a few other choice words.
Yeah,
And,
but they were the ones that were kissing your ass when they ran out of ammo.
No, they weren't. They were. The machine gunner on the right flank said, "Hey, I ran out of ammo," and I asked my gunner, "You want me to take some over?" Because I think the basic load for ammo bearer was 400 rounds.
Yes.
But when one of the old timers told me, "Make sure your weapon's clean, magazine's clean.
Oh, yes.
Tomorrow we're going to a bad area."
Yeah.
So instead of carrying the 400 rounds, I carried 600. And what do you know? The other machine gun on the right flank, he ran out of ammo first. But I said, "Hey, I said to the gunner, you want me to crawl over there and give him a couple hundred rounds?" And he said, "Hell no. That's our ammo. That's my ammo, my gun." So.
And that was that.
Yeah.
Nothing else said. That was that.
I did exactly what the old timers told me to do, right to the letter. But how I got wounded that day was a guy was shot in the right leg, and then he got up and started running, and he got shot on the lower right side. So we get them all back, and they're on our left flank, most of the wounded guys. And Doc Flores is telling us how to take care of them, put pressure on the 2 wounds. And sometime during that process, I got shot through the steel pot. So either the bullet creased the top of my skull on the right side, or the metal from the .30 caliber bullet punched through.
Yeah.
And
it creased the top of your head.
Yeah. So.
And somebody said, "You're bleeding."
Yeah, and we argued about that. Because I didn't want to freak out. You know, I wanted to make sure I was known as a guy that could do what he'd been trained to do, so the old timers might slack up.
I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
So, did you get to take an R&R?
I went to Tokyo, Japan. I had listened, and I had observed the guys coming back from Thailand, Bangkok, Thailand. And just from 10 days in Thailand. They looked like they'd been in Vietnam in a combat situation for years. So I thought, beautiful women, great food, that's the place I want to go. So I waited probably around the 7th or 8th month and put in my bid for Bangkok and got it. And I go to Saigon, and right behind me in line, a staff sergeant that was running a list of where each person was going said, okay, guys line up. And right behind me was a sergeant major or command sergeant major. I didn't really look and until we had a conversation. See, he wanted to go to Bangkok, Thailand, and he wanted me to take his R&R in Japan. And I go, no, we were arguing back and forth for a couple of minutes till I got to the front of the line, and the staff sergeant said, okay, where are you going, Crabtree? And I go, Bangkok, Thailand. And then the staff sergeant, he looked up at the sergeant major. He was standing right there on my left side. So the sergeant major said, and he pointed at his rank, staff sergeant, you ever been out in the bush? And the staff sergeant said, no, I've spent my entire time in a rear echelon area. And the sergeant major said, well, anyway, Leroy wants to go to Japan. He's going to trade with me. I'm going to Thailand. And I'm going, no. I've been waiting 7, 8 months.
Yeah.
I want to go to Thailand. Here's my paperwork. And the sergeant major told the staff sergeant, I know people in personnel. If I don't go to Bangkok, Thailand today, within a week, you're going out to the bush. So what's it going to be? Where's Leroy going? By then, the sergeant major was calling me by my first name. The staff sergeant, well, obviously, sir, he's going to Japan. You're going to Thailand. I go, no, man, look at my paperwork. I've been waiting 7, 8 months. And the short story is I ended up in Tokyo, Japan. And
I bet it wasn't a bad R&R.
oh, it was pretty good.
Yeah.
I met up with a couple Navy guys and a couple of Marines and a couple Army guys. And we went up to Yokohama for a few days. And once we got there, we rented rooms for a week. And, rooms were pretty inexpensive. So anyway, we all went our different ways the next morning. So
Tell us a little bit about the night at Shamrock when they shot the B-40 rockets and the RPGs in, and it turned out to be a very, very bad night. Share with us a little bit about that.
I'm surprised you're asking about Shamrock. It was probably the worst night of my 2 tours I did in Vietnam. Mac Mitchell was killed along with 4 or 5 guys on his
Bass
base.
was one of them.
Yeah.
Bass.
And I got hit in the right bicep with shrapnel. A platoon sergeant from another platoon came over, put a tourniquet on it, and the arm went numb almost immediately. So from there, you think it wouldn't get any worse, but they put me and 2 other white guys outside the wire, waiting for medevacs to come, and about an hour passed. And finally, we did that childhood game of rock, paper, scissors. My luck was running pretty bad, so I ended up the one that had to stand up and yell at the bunker line, don't shoot. So they didn't shoot. I could hear that 50 caliber cranking back, you know the handle?
Oh, you never forget
So
that
you know
shot.
what happens then, the next second, there's somebody shooting at you. So we were just laying out in front in open rice paddy and no weapons. And I go back in and I probably get in an argument with the same staff sergeant that put the bandage on my right bicep. And said, hey, we've been out there an hour, man, what's going on? And the captain said, oh my God, I forgot about you guys.
Oh, boy.
So I just said, I was really mad then. I just said, look, my arm's starting to bleed again. I'm running out of blood. How about calling a medevac for us? And the hell with the mistake, so he forgot about us.
Sure, sure.
The staff sergeant said, hey, you're being disrespectful to the captain. So yeah.
That night, there were a lot of guys that got wounded.
Yeah.
Okay, Lanny Ross, remember he always slept in a hammock?
No, I can't remember.
He had a little, he took a gook hammock off of one of the dead NBA that they got. And you know how skinny those things are?
Oh, sure, they're very narrow.
And you literally laid in them like a banana.
Yeah, yeah.
And Mike, the kid Lozon,
I remember him.
and he got wounded that night, and
You got him an offline job, as I remember.
I did.
Yeah, that was really cool.
And so, how long were you with the Wolfhounds?
I would think 9 months, and
Okay.
then that night, me and the two white guys, when the medevacs finally came, they put me on the ship with Mac Mitchell and those 4 or 5 dead guys, and I went to the hospital with them, and that was like 3 or 4 hours process of getting checked out,
Yes,
getting the arm
sure.
scraped on and cut, and they had to call the battalion NCO to come and pick me up. All I had on was a pair of pants. The nurses or the medics, they stripped me down to my fatigue pants, and that's all I had on. And the sergeant said, where are your clothes? And I said, well, they took them off, and they threw them in a pile out back, they said. So I went back to the company in Cu-Chi. He dropped me off right at the front door, and there was the company clerk. He was mad because they woke him up in the middle of the night. But they got me to a hooch, and very next morning, about 8 o'clock, here comes the first sergeant, Crabtree. You got to go back out to field today. We can't have you back here screwing around. So I said, well, you know, it's like falling off a horse, first sergeant. You get back up, and you go back out at the field, get your nerve up, and it's easier that way. Yeah, but I said, since you demand it, I have to go back out to field. Here's my 10-day profile. And
Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot about those.
they gave me 10 days.
Yep.
Because on the right bicep, the shrapnel, 2 pieces were still in there, and they gave me 10 days profile in hopes of the shrapnel working its way out,
Yes.
but it never did. And Doc Flores actually, about, I guess it'd been a month, and he just pulled, he said, instead of you going back to Cu-Chi, I'll just pull your you know that,
The metal pieces.
no, not the metal pieces, the thing that held the skin together.
Oh, the stitches.
Stitches, yeah. See, I have mind blocks on
No, yeah, no,
sometimes.
I
Yeah,
know.
so I just stood right there, and he stood next to me, and alcohol prep pads, and pulled it out, 10, 12 stitches, so.
So you went and did another job during that tour?
Oh, after I came back out, and I was out about, how long was it? Maybe a month. That's why I was at the 9th or 10th month mark. But a sergeant who I didn't get along with, tall white kid with short hair, and I think he had blonde hair or something like that. He put me on rear security. Remember, Sergeant Garcia used to walk rear security. That was his kingdom.
Yeah.
But I got back there and didn't know what I was doing, and within 10 days, I tripped 2 booby traps. Neither one went off, and I just figured my luck's bad.
Yeah.
So
And guys get superstitious.
everybody was, yeah.
But you know what I'm saying? I mean,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
longer you're there, all of a sudden the chances are higher. And if you're there 10 months, you're freaking.
Yeah, because you think the last 90 days, you're a short timer, you're a double-digit midget, as I heard the phrase several times.
Yeah.
And so you really do get superstitious. Things you did before without thinking, walking point or carrying ammo for the gun, I decided I should go ahead and do that because to me made it easier to do that job because it was a dangerous job. And I carried demolitions for the platoon and stuff like that. I carried the radio every once in a while. I can't remember that. He was Puerto Rican, I think.
Alejandro.
Yes. When he made E4, man, he was unbearable. No, I'm E4.
Jose Alejandro.
Yeah, he said, I'm specialist 4th class. You are a PFC. You go and do this or that. I'm not doing it. So, and he was very steadfast, very stubborn.
Sure.
He was a cool man, but I was startled by his open aggression about filling
Sure.
sandbags and stuff.
And you did a second tour in Vietnam.
Right.
In other words, if I understand correctly, you had so much fun the first tour that you went home and said, I just got to go back there. And
There are extremely bad duty stations in the Army, and Germany, mine in particular, was really bad. You slept in a big open bay with
so I didn't realize you went to Germany.
Yeah, I came back and I was out about a year.
Okay.
And my marriage failed. And the judge awarded me all our bills that my wife had made, ex-wife soon, hopefully. And so I got to where I was going to school carrying 12 units, which is probably 4 classes. And I was working 6 nights a week in a restaurant. I was eating okay, but I was just running out of energy because you put out so much effort. I just got tired of it. So I went back in '73, October, and I went to Fort Lewis thinking, I'll go to Fort Lewis. They used to ship a lot of people out of there for Vietnam.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought I'd make a career of it. So I was up at Fort Lewis on Main Fort, and after a year there in '73, I ended up going to Korea. And then I eventually ended up in Germany. I fooled around and got kicked out of DI school at Fort Ord. And so they sent me to Europe, which to a leg is Germany. So I was there about a week and realized there were only 3 social groups. There were the religious guys, the drinkers, and the druggies. I guess that would be a good word. And nobody would accept you. I mean, if you were not religious or smoking hash, which was the preferred drug, and or the alcoholics. And since I didn't do any 3 of the 3, the living was just too restrictive. So I asked around, how long do I have to be here in this unit to put in a request at 1049? And so the guy told me, well, listen, we're not going to let you go anywhere except to Vietnam. And I go, Vietnam? Really? And he goes, yeah, a lot of people want to transfer out, but when they realize Vietnam, well, I eventually get back. I was in Germany 6 months and a week before I got my orders to clear. And I went back to Vietnam, and I was sent up to Quang Nguyen, 2 corps they called it. And back from Quang Nguyen, down on the flatlands near the coast, they sent me up on top of this place called Vung Chua Mountain. So, because I had the combat experience from the first tour, they put me in as a gate guard, and then I got put on the bunker line at night. So you were either on the day shift, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., or 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. So I got stuck on the night shift, and I pulled bunker guard duty for 4 months, 5 months maybe. And then they were starting to send infantry units home. So what happened was, there was a place called ICS Site 15, which was down on the coastline, and it was just a sand spit. And it went out into Quang Nguyen Bay, and they had mostly American civilians teaching Vietnamese guys how to work the microwave
Oh, yeah.
equipment. So we had one E5 sergeant. They eventually closed Vung Chua Mountain Post down, turned it over to the Vietnamese guys. And me and 4 or 5 other lower ranking enlisted men and the one Sergeant 85, we went down to ICS Site 15. And my first job there was gate guard.
I'm going to back you up a little bit.
Sure.
There is a story that I know about you that it's like a full circle story. You started out with the Wolhounds,
Yep.
and then you wound up as a crew chief on, on a helicopter. And one of the things that happened is your helicopter got called out.
Yeah.
Go from there.
Okay. I was a mechanic, and they had a job opening on the 25th Division Artillery Commander's ship. And nobody wanted it because you didn't fly. As a crew chief, you sat back there in that little hole, and what you did was daily maintenance on the Huey. So I'm a mechanic on the job training about 4 or 5 months, and my squad leader came up and said, "Hey, you want to be a crew chief?" And I thought, honestly, in my heart, that he had confidence in my mechanical skills. But the reality was, nobody else would volunteer for the job because the very nature of the division commander, he would fly around 18, 20 hours a day to various artillery support bases. And you might be there a couple hours, you might be there half an hour. So one day we're going to this little artillery post, and believe it or not, Charlie Company, 2nd to 27th, they were in a bad firefight and they called for artillery support. So their artillery commander, once he discovered there were 2 or 3 wounded guys, it turns out both staff sergeant and from our platoon.
Yes.
So once we went to that spot, we just dropped right down onto a rice paddy, and the infantry guys, I didn't know them, I didn't recognize them, and they would run about 20 yards and then drop down because Charlie was shooting at them.
Mm-hmm.
And before I knew it, I didn't even unplug. It was a spontaneous thing, and I told my pilot and co-pilot, "Hey, I'm going to go help those guys." So I ran over, and before I got to them, my plug, which would stretch out 20 feet, communication line, whatever you call it, it didn't stretch no more, and my feet ran out from underneath me, and I fell on my back. So I reach up, and the pilot is shouting in the helmet speakers, "Unplug, unplug." So I did, and I got up and ran over and collected one staff sergeant, and he was from 2nd Platoon. And then I ran over and tossed him in the Huey and ran back and got the second guy. And my main motivation for doing that was, it wasn't a John Wayne stunt. The most dangerous time for a helicopter is when it's sitting on the ground or when it's starting to take off.
Mm-hmm.
So, or land, either way. I didn't want to stay there any longer than necessary, and so I get the second guy and I run him back to the Huey and throw him on, and he wouldn't move when he hit the floor of the Huey, so I got up in the back of the Huey and drug him further in next to the other E6. And anyway, the guy, the division artillery commander, was yelling at me on the loudspeaker. They were going like this, and they wanted me to plug back in.
Yeah.
So I did, and the division artillery commander was yelling at me, "What the hell are you doing?" I said, "Well, you've flown long enough. This was the most dangerous time for a Huey or anything." And I just did it on an impulse. And
And as a result of that, you were awarded a Silver Star.
no, no, no,
Bronze.
no, no, no. Actually, I was awarded, didn't ever actually get it pinned on my chest, so to speak, like they did in the Wolhounds with the
Yeah,
purple
yeah.
hearts. I got an air medal with V device.
Oh, yeah.
Which
Okay.
is what you get a medal in Vietnam, Bronze Star, whatever. They pretty much always come with a V, which signifies that you got it in a combat
Yes,
situation.
exactly.
So,
Well, nonetheless, you got back with the Wolfhounds one more time.
yeah.
Now, in winding this interview up, I've got a question that I want you to think about and just tell me what comes out. What is your definition of a hero?
Oh, geez. It was like Doc Flores. I consider him a hero. Anytime a guy was wounded, to Doc Flores, it was immediate reaction. He would go to the wounded man. And, or one guy helping out another guy that was wounded. Or the guys that were killed and didn't come home alive, back home alive. Yeah, they're the heroes. My older brother said I was a hero when he saw I had an air medal with V device and a
Sure.
Purple Heart and a CIB, and I said, no, man, I'm not a hero. I'm just a survivor. Those guys that
You know what was really weird? None of us would have ever said we were heroes,
yeah,
but we always said we served with heroes. Isn't that something? We never looked at ourselves and even thought, wouldn't even say that. And if somebody said, well, surely there was some heroes over there. Oh yeah, I served with a lot of them.
it was always the other guys. Doc
Yep.
Flores. I always thought he was the hero.
Well, he was the first one that asked about it. He was our first interview and you were the first guy that, so, well, Leroy, I can't thank you enough, my friend, for, for coming and being with us, and I just want to thank you so much, and you and I have become pretty darn close over the years, and I can't, you're one of the best supporters and encouragers of the guys and me personally, and that means so much to me, and I just want to thank you for
I think you're doing something really cool by bringing other Wolfhound members from the platoon, and certainly their extended family members, together once every couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't honestly know if I'll ever come to one, because I really get nervous and anxious when I think about seeing guys from the platoon. I remember you handed out this like phone directory, and I called a bunch of new guys and a bunch of old timers. And because of my, I called them and nobody remembered me, so that was my arrogance.
Well, and you know how that works, right? Initially, because they weren't in that mode or they weren't thinking of anything,
Yeah,
all of a sudden here's a guy calling, say, hey, this is me, remember? And I mean, they can't even get this going. They got to take time to get the gears going up there because of what happened in Vietnam.
well, Doc Flores, he remembered me within a minute or so.
Sure.
He took care of me both times.
Well, all those guys at Shamrock remember you, every
Yeah.
single one of them.
Your father. I hate bringing this up. I got this funny knife I bought, huh?
Please do.
Oh, okay. It was his son's idea that I could bring this up. I bought a knife at Fort Lewis, Washington, out of the PX the week before we shipped out. It was called a Puma knife, and its brand name was White Hunter. Big John, we were first day in Shamrock. Big John comes over and says, hey, Crabtree, because the old timers rarely called us by our first names. We were just something to do, to assign work details and stuff. And Big John says, can I borrow your knife? And I don't think you'll remember this, but you went over to a bunker, and I actually seen a picture of you throwing a knife.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I remember it just like it was yesterday.
Big John, being the arrogant old timer, he sold it to an engineer. Do you remember that? $50. Our payback then was $225 a month. And we had a lot of 20-hour, 24-hour days.
But what you're not telling is Ray Bushwell was the guy I was throwing against, and I actually won.
Ah,
And then I went over, and it was that engineer that used to go out with us all the time.
well, I'll be darned.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember Ray's
Yep,
name.
Yep.
There was only you in the picture, and I go, $50? Because I don't think it cost $25 at the PX, but it's funny the things you remember
Oh,
from
yeah.
your time. I remember just like it was yesterday, Doc Flores was picking the metal out of this, from my steel pot where I got shot through the steel pot. And he was swabbing it with a alcohol prep pad, and the alcohol really burned. So, yeah, he took care of me that time. Doc Flores, you know.
Yeah. Well, Leroy, thank you again, buddy.
Ah,
And this means a lot to us, and it's going to mean a whole lot to the guys.
I even though I thought some of the old timers were really arrogant, it took me decades to realize that they were that way mentally because of the stuff they had went through
Yeah.
in their tour. So, yeah. And Doc Flores, he was pretty mellow, you know,
Oh,
for
gosh,
what he did.
he was cool hand Luke.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Tim, did that come out okay, do you think? Did you get some good?
Yeah.
All right.